Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Windsor. I guess I'm Canadian by birth. I live in the United States, but I swear like an Australian. So this talk will probably have some punctuation in it along the way. By background, I have been working in an area called supply chain security or software supply chain security for about 8 years now. It started when I was at Google, working on developer tools, and as part of it, I was building developer tools for cloud and talked to a bunch of CTOs and CIOs and asked them what they were doing about vulnerability management. And they all sort of wrung their hands and cried a little bit into their tea and talked about upgrading their VMs. And I asked them what they were doing about their packages, language packages, and sort of the other levels of supply chain security and risk. And they all looked at me kind of shocked and said, either what or please don't tell my CISO, they'll shut me down. And that sort of has begun a journey. Somewhere along the way, I ended up working still at Google doing supply chain security for Google's internal needs and our open source presence. And that turned into this project called Alpha Omega. And Alpha Omega started out as a fund that was jointly created by Microsoft and Google with about $2.5 million each. And it's actually sat there as a fund inside the LF for about a year before a gentleman named Michael Scovetta and I started talking. And all of a sudden, we figured some things out and decided to try some things, did some experiments, and the experiments worked well enough that Google and Microsoft kept funding us, and Amazon joined the party. And so we've been at it now for quite a few years. That was in 21 we first started the conversation. And this talk is about sort of the observations, the lessons learned from spending money in the sort of the almost impossible task of fixing open source security. So when we first started out, Michael Scovetta had written a paper called Alpha Omega, and he was sort of imagining funding Alpha being the top 100 most critical open source projects. And then the Omega was the long tail of everything else. It turns out that there is absolutely no way to get even 3 people to agree on what the top 3 open source projects are, let alone what the top 100 are. And there was a working group at the OpenSSF that tried to put this list together and just got longer and longer as everybody was like, this one definitely, that one. Even more interestingly, the ones that were obviously up there and they were important didn't really need our help. Sometimes they needed more help than others, but really at the end of the day, they were so putting money into those didn't make sense. And so we kind of pivoted and thought about Alpha instead of meaning sort of the top 100 projects. We really said, let's look for points of leverage where we can have grants and funding towards specific things that have outsized impact, that scale out beyond what we can do. And that actually helped us create this mission statement from the previous slide about catalyzing change. The amount of work that needs to be done to improve security, to make all of open source truly secure, could be measured in the billions of dollars. It's a staggering amount of money. And the real problem is not that the engineering resources aren't available to do that, it's that they are prioritizing other things, and they're also not good at it. And so catalyzing that change has been a goal of ours for a while. On the Omega side, there are literally hundreds of thousands of projects that are either single maintainer, abandonware, individual people working in their own little corner, and focused on other things, and trying to sort of solve them by direct intervention was never going to work. And so we need to get to a place where there are scalable solutions, where we can literally just throw money and compute at problems, or better infrastructure around those things to make them more secure. Over the past few years, we've raised a lot of money. We spent most of it. It's an inside joke for us that we keep sort of planning to have our Alpha Omega offsite in Fiji, and somehow we've never done that. I'm actually quite proud of the fact that last year, our efficiency in terms of how much money came in versus how much money went to improving open source was almost 93%. And that includes the Jim Zemlin LF tax on top of the money that we're getting there. So that's, and I even got paid to do some of that work, which is pretty exciting. We recently added Citi as a sort of member as part of the group. They're not coming in with the same money, but they're coming in with money, and more importantly, their name, their brand, their attention, their experience. Honestly, if you wanted to look around the sort of corporate space to find a company that is really doing it right when it comes to supply chain security, Citi is nailing it. And I talk to John Meadows, they're the head of that sort of security engineering group, all the time and learn from him every day. These are just some of the things that we've spent money on, and we'll dig into a little bit along the way. So I'm going to first start talking about the scaled side of the problem, because it's really, really fucked up. It's incredibly hard to make change here, and we've learned about all the ways how not to do it. One of the first things that we tried were various automated approaches to finding vulnerabilities, creating patches for them, submitting PRs, filing vulnerability reports on the systems and so forth, and then expecting the maintainers to go, oh my God, thanks for that. It did not work out that way. We then hired a vendor who had some automated techniques as well, and had them go off, and instead of like, they started out by doing like, 3,000 projects and just scanning them for vulnerabilities, finding new vulnerabilities, creating the PRs, patching them, and then they kind of did a little bit more hand lifting and contacting them to try and get the PRs picked up. And it sort of felt like, okay, it wasn't too bad. Like the cost per vuln fixed was not outrageous. We could see how if we just kept adding money, it would play out. But when all was said and done, and they came back and they said, we scanned 3,000 packages, we found 300 vulnerabilities, we fixed 30 of them, and 3 were accepted. And I made up those numbers, those are not the actual numbers. But it sort of felt like if somebody, if you told somebody, I want you to clean up the Pacific garbage patch, right? And they came back with a rowboat full of plastic, or maybe a barge full of plastic. It doesn't matter, because the orders of magnitude here are off the charts, right? The garbage patch is gigatons of plastic. You came back with a rowboat or a barge or whatever, and what can I do differently based on what you've done? I can either send out 1 million rowboats, or I can tell people, hey, we've made the world safer. Nobody can do anything differently based on that. So it's not actionable, it's not useful, and one of our many tenets is we want impact, we want outcomes that we can benefit from reasonably quickly. So it was pretty clear that we had a problem. And so we thought about it again, and around the time, do you remember the XZ utils attack? Right? Everybody remembers that. It's like the poster child of why your small maintainer project is a nightmare for you and you didn't know it yet. And I realized that one of the problems here was the economics of how people were thinking about open source were wrong, but also, somewhat ironically, right? How many of us, as maintainers of open source, have complained about those corporate players who just take our source code for free and use it without giving anything back and profit from it and don't want to spend any money because their competitors aren't spending money, so why would they be the first one to blink, right? Pretty much every open source project ever has at least had someone saying that, right? How many open source projects have looked at their dependencies and said, my God, those poor suckers are working for us, we should go help them? Yeah, the correct answer is none, right? And we looked at, in the XZ thing, and looked at the projects that were open source projects, were well funded with resources and engineering, right? And were working on things and used XZ, and how many of them had even looked up to say, I wonder if there's a human being behind that project? And the answer was a deafening 0. And so instead of trying to pick up the Pacific garbage patch, we came up with this idea, and actually started with a project called Airflow. And a gentleman in Yarrick came up to me after a talk and says, I want you to speak at the Airflow conference about this stuff. And I'm like, I'm not going to speak for nothing. We're going to talk about something we did. And we started talking, and he had already done the most important thing, which he had an inventory of all of Airflow's dependencies, 719 of them. We will not speak of the front-end dependencies. The world of JavaScript and browsers is a whole other problem. But he had 719 back-end dependencies. And he knew all of them. And I said, this is great. I want you to go and look at all of those and see which ones need your attention. See which ones need help from your project. See which ones represent risk to your project. And so we started a very new kind of audit. And the idea here was, instead of trying to pick up the Pacific garbage patch, right, we just wanted to find one beach, a community beach that we'll call Airflow. And we'll get that community of people in the Airflow space to give a shit about the beach and to pick up, not everything, but to clean that beach of, broken glass, cigarette butts, whatever other strange things they find, do a cleaning of the beach. And the goal played out incredibly well. The Airflow We funded that initial project. They did an audit, and the audit wasn't go look at the code, because it turns out that the code and the vulnerabilities you can find in a project are the least interesting thing to look at. And that's at odds with every CISO today sitting there trying to get to checkboxing on zero vulns on their releases, right? The real risk is around the culture, the process of how that project handles vulnerabilities, right? Now, I want you all, because I'm here today for a purpose, to think about that in the context of BSD, right? That's why we're having this conversation today. And they did, honestly, it was a little bit more than scorecard and a bit of a script here and there and a cursory analysis to go look at these things. And they realized, wow, there's a lot of them. We can't look at them all, even in level detail. And it turns out that didn't matter, because they could look at, I think it was 150 pretty easily. And there was some manual, some automation, some inspection, so forth. And then they came up with a list of just 16 that were immediately, going back to, remember I said the top most critical projects? Well, they had no trouble identifying 16 that were worthy of their attention. And they paid attention to those things, and amazing things happened. And I'll come back to this topic. I'm trying to remember my slides here. So I'm going to come back to this because we build on this theme, right? So scaled is hard. If you think about it, what's really happening here is scaled is best done fractally, where you look at the top of ecosystems, where you have funded engineering resources, often connected to a business model, and you help them reprioritize their work. So instead of working on the next new feature all the time, they're looking not only at their own code, but upstream and saying, where is my risk? We're going to come back. This is a theme you will hear a lot. So in a more broad sense, going back to the alpha side of catalyzing change, right? We think about transforming the security culture of organizations. And what we have learned time and time again, and this project here is no exception, is that the best way to start is by funding an actual audit. And you learn a lot by how an organization responds to even the hello, we're from Alpha Omega, we'd like to fund an audit for you, right? How they respond. We don't need one, we're fine. Or what's an audit? Or what have we done wrong, right? Which are all like cliches, and yet here we are, right? We've also learned that code audits are great, but even the first few hours of the conversation tell you everything you need to know about where that project is in their journey, and make decisions about how to help, and also as a consumer, how to use or not use that project a lot easier to make. I think I'll talk about it later, but if I don't, Ed, please remind me, we've started a concept now called rapid security reviews. And we've started this with the Eclipse Foundation. I also work with them. And the idea is, what can we do in 4 hours? Not 4 weeks or 4 months, not $40,000, $50,000 or $100,000. What can we do in 4 hours, less than $1,000 of time? And the answer is, it's a lot. It's pretty cool. So everything starts with an audit. The organization will then find out all the things that are wrong, the risks and like that, prioritize them, and then coming back in 6 months and finding out what happened after the audit tells you, again, much more than you wanted to know. The other thing we've learned is that when security is just that big problem, right, it turns out into being the nobody problem, right? And so the cliche of syndrome, when everybody's special, nobody is. And you know, honestly, when we first started working with FreeBSD, we were pretty thrilled that there was this dude named Ed, whose name I can never remember how to pronounce correctly, who was already there, right? Yeah, no, it's Ed. I got it. Thanks. I set it up, you tied it, boom, it was right there. And so this actually turned into a common engagement for us when there wasn't somebody whose job it was to worry about security, and where there was enough of an institutional framework around that project or that culture or that ecosystem that they could in fact hire somebody. Because the other thing we've learned is that we are hands-off. We're not actively doing things, we are funding things, and that 92.5% efficiency doesn't come from having a lot of people. And so making it someone's job has all kinds of amazing implications because, well, it's funny, when we first started this, our goal was, we will fund your security engineer in residence for the first year, maybe 2, but we want you to start funding it yourself over a course of 3 years. And we said that to a bunch of our recipients. Any guesses as to how that went? Yeah. It went really poorly, right? It takes a long time to change the funding priorities of an organization. And also, most open source foundations or parent organizations are not development shops. They don't fund development work. They are organizational, governance, marketing, eventing, and like that. And so the context for which that work needed to happen is it's different. And the organizations that are funding development work in that space are jealous about how they do that. They put their engineers into the space, but they don't just hand over development money to other people, right? And again, economics plays out a lot here. So we've been doing that. We haven't been able to wean them of our funding, but what has happened has been almost even better. If you think about a boat pushing its way through the water, right? There's a bow wave, and we're paying for that bow wave. And there's all of these cool dudes foil surfing on the wake behind that boat, right? Doing all kinds of great security work in the wake of that effort. And we've seen that over and over again, is that when somebody's leading the way, good things happen, which is why I love this slide here. The role in a security engineering residence, it's not about actually doing the work, right? There's I mentioned before, there's billions of dollars worth of work to be done. In any project, there's just an unmanageable amount of work to be done. But setting the tone, normalizing the process, normalizing the kind of work that gets done, and then prioritizing and actually having an intentional voice about what things we should do. By the way, these slides are available. I'll give you a Go link, and you can get to them afterwards. By the way, all these images were made with an AI. I had more fun doing it, and the prompt wars were hilarious. It's a lot of fun. So the big lesson out of this, right, is that the people involved are more important than the culture, which is more important than the process, which is a hell of a lot more important than the current volunteers you have, right? And so the question I would ask for you, right, is as you think about this as your team and your work and this set of people here is, where are you? Where do you feel your strengths are here? Where are you prioritizing your security thinking? What is good? What is bad? What do you want to change there? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit now about how we have turned money into security, right? Security is a function of the money we put in. Great, how does that work out? And these are almost, again, you could apply most of these things to good software development practices, but it's harder in open source because everybody's doing their own thing in their own way. And as a funding group where I'm not the boss of you, right? You don't work for me. And that's true, by the way, for everything, right? And the classic passive-aggressive defense of PR is welcome, asshole, right? So one of the things that we are very clear about is that we are focused on shovel-ready projects. And by that I mean there's a clear hole to be dug, there's a shovel with which to dig it, or we know what the kind of shovel we need to do it is, there's someone who's going to do the digging, and then whatever's going in that hole afterwards is ready to go in that hole, right? We don't fund things where we say, this is great, you should totally hire someone to do this project, here's a pile of money, let us know when you found that person or that vendor or that organization to do that work, right? We want everything lined up and ready to go because we don't want to just transfer a pile of money from our foundation to some other foundation and then them go through the not fun process of finding qualified security people to work on hard problems. And so if you're not ready to do the work, we're not ready to fund the money. We will tee it up and have it ready to go, but we are very clear about that. And we also like to be able to talk about that impact in a useful way, in a quarter or 2 quarters, a year. A year's a long time for us. We're also really focused on making sure that since we are a foundation for open source improvements, that we're always creating a public good. That is not always as easy as it sounds. There's a lot of open source out there, and we all experience the variety of licenses that are emerging in this space. We're focused on the public good of organizations consuming open source. The organizations that are producing it have as many different varied approaches as you can imagine. And in particular, the AI space now is creating some real challenges for us in terms of like where we would feel comfortable putting money, where we feel like we have to help out. We're now looking at dozens of companies that are springing up around an open source project doing AI. But the governance of the project is entirely in a corporate entity funded by VCs and so forth. They have money. Why are we propping up their insecure process? And the answer is because a whole bunch of other dumb schmucks are pulling their insecure stuff down and using it and creating real damages. So we're still developing a strategy here. Our thinking now is we want to get involved early on projects before they become big and overfunded, and see if we can plant lots of seeds of good security in there and see how that plays out over time. But we'll also do a few things where we'll create a poster child or two and just say, look, everybody, these guys are doing a great job. Wouldn't you be bad if you didn't? And see if we can guilt a bunch of companies to caring. So as I mentioned before, we look for leverage. By the way, this was an impossibly hard image to generate with an AI. If you try to get an AI to generate an image of a fulcrum, right, or a lever, where it is not a seesaw, it is not competent to do so. Like I managed to get it inch over to like about, I don't know, like 5/8, right? And then I'm like, a little bit more, boom, it gives up back to the seesaw every time. So this was a composite one, took a little fighting. But we look for leverage notably around large ecosystems. You know, something like BSD, where there are an awful lot of organizations and projects and things that are around that. There is a community there, and when things happen, they can spread further than we could ever achieve on our own, right? I mean, most of you have never heard of Alpha Omega or me. That's a good thing as far as we're concerned. I talked about this before, but it's actually really key for us, right? We very much want to be there to help. We like to be there with you on the journey. We learn as much from everyone's journey as we teach. It is, I think, a fully bilateral experience, but we are not there to manage, micromanage, or control the outcomes. And that has allowed us to scale well. As I said, I work maybe 1 to 2 days a week, and we have dozens of active projects at any one point in time. I would be running around with my hair on fire pretty quickly if not. And this is probably my favorite outcome from Alpha Omega that none of us could have anticipated, is that the family of organizations that we have funded, we started pulling them together and having literally a round table. We did virtual, we did in person, we try to do it now 4 times a year. And we just have people from all these different walks of open source and different roles, from foundation directors to security engineers to marketing people to business development, fundraising, in a room together talking about the problems of open source in a security context. And every time I ask, was this worth your time? Should we do it again? And by the way, I never go in there with a plan. I don't even have an agenda. We just show up and we start talking. And everyone's like, yep, we can't wait for the next one. We're doing it again. And the network of what is becoming sort of a boys and girls network of security, trust, and knowledge, and transfer of knowledge, and how to set up this and how to do that, has just been amazing. And we're building on that. So, although we bring money, what really matters are the resources and the culture. The organizations that find it in their self-interest to commit engineering towards a project, and a culture around that commitment, is what really makes a difference in open source. So going back to the Airflow example, Airflow is a well-funded project because it's very close to revenue. Lots of businesses are able to monetize Airflow as a service, and so they are quite happy having 4 or 5 engineers working on the project. And by working with them and creating that beach cleaning effort, those engineers are now putting security on their roadmap. The 2025 roadmap, the V3 and beyond roadmap for Airflow, has a lot of security work on it, and they've taken active steps, right? That wasn't happening before. And that audit, by the way, I think we spent $50,000 on. I like that kind of impact. So let's talk about the economics. Economics of open source are, to put a word, completely fucked up. Most people don't understand them. People are either thinking, someone's working for free for me, this is great, right? Or they think that corporations are running the show in some way, and I could go on for days on this, but I'm gonna run out of time. I'm already like way past my timeline as it is, but like, understanding how humans choose to work on open source, how they are in a corporation getting paid and they find a way to work on an open source project. Why? Because when they leave, they have value. That's one of the reasons, right? Like if you are at Google and you work on Borg and you decide, I'm done with this Google place, I'm gonna work somewhere else, your Borg skills are worth exactly 0, right? The number of entities that are building Borg is 0. If you worked on Kubernetes, you're a hot ticket. It also happened in research. Researchers would work at a school somewhere doing some stuff, and then when they leave that school, they want to be able to take their source code with them so they could reproduce their research somewhere else to do something else, right? There's a tension between the venture capital that wants to control the outcomes and benefit the profits from software, and the engineers who are creating that software, right? Early days of Silicon Valley, engineers made all the millions and the billions. And then money people are like, oh, we're the ones who make money. You make software, we make money. They changed the game. Open source, move things around again. We're seeing the change there. So there's all these changes around it. But the unfortunate part, right, is that no matter how funding or engineering resources come into open source, right, they are not wired for security engineering. Everybody is in a growth war, one way or the other. Whether it is a growth war on revenue and market share, or it is popularity for your open source project, there is some other one that's doing another thing that's similar, but yours is more popular. Whether you are seeking personal validation, financial gain, or creating a market for your side consulting business, all these variations, right? Very few of them reward security up front, right? That is the world of capitalism that we live in, whether the currency is dollars, or GitHub stars, or dependencies, or dependence. I don't have cool pictures for these because I haven't figured out a way how to make these look cool in pictures. But here's another thing. So now you've got some project that you depend upon, and you look at it, right? And there's a person working on that project, and they're working nights and weekends. Can you buy more nights and weekends from that person? When you give them money, what's going to happen? Are they going to say, this is great, now I can do all those security things, including my other roadmap, right? No, you can't. And in fact, you can't even do that with corporations, because they have planned out their year, they've got their required hours, they've got their business goals, they've got people who are working, let's just honestly say 5 to 9 as opposed to 9 to 5. You can't get more time out of those people. So until those priorities change, and they care about them in different reasons, you can't pay them to do this extra work. And in particular, those XZ projects are high risk. Because you can't just walk up and say, you're a problem. Already they feel great, they love you now, right? Here's some money, stop being a problem. That doesn't work. Right? I've had people come to me asking for money because they're working on some project. It's a nights and weekends thing. It's relatively popular. And they want to be able to work on it full time. If I had $1 for every time that had happened, I'd have a lot of dollars to fund all that work. Right? It doesn't play out that well. So people are focused on growth. It is true in corporations, but it's also true in open source. And people don't always think that one through, but it plays out every single time. So I think FreeBSD may be an exception to this, but an awful lot of open source ecosystems depend upon external funding for infrastructure, for better and for worse. And so the operating costs of something like crates.io, anyone want to take a guess? How much do you think it costs a year to run crates.io? I'll buy a free croissant in the lobby for someone who gets it right. You're close. It's on the order of 10 million. It's a little bit less than that, and that's the best model they've got. They're one of the more diligent organizations in terms of tracking that budget separately. That is including all the cloud credits they get, the CDN credits they get, the operations cost, and the security engineering work that goes into it as well. We fund some of that. So, open source projects have bad business models. They haven't figured out how to create sustainability. It is very common, whether it is PyPI or FreeBSD, right? When you think about the project's sustainable health, you can look at how close it is to revenue, how easy it is to track the impact of the work to a corporate revenue space or to an individual's personal outcomes, and you can see directly how likely they are to get the resourcing they need to do the things that they do. It's kind of weird to talk about a business model for an open source project, but that's the kind of guy I am. I spend a lot of money in this space, and at the end of the day, whether it is their personal time, which is a currency of its own, or whether it is corporate engineering because we need these features for our whatever, or because it is grants or credits, there's always a purpose, and understanding it is really important. Okay, so now this is, I think, particularly relevant today and what we've been talking about with all of you, right? So you can look at your dependency graph, and you all have some, right? Whether you vendor them in or you pull them into a package manager or whatever, you have a bunch of dependencies, right? And you can pretend that that is someone else's problem. It's XZ utils again, right? But hear me now. It is all your code. If it's in your system and you're compiling it in, it has total access to your build environment, and it has total access to your production runtime environment. So it's not someone else's code. It's your code. And when you sign off on a release or commit something or talk about how proud you are to have done this work on whatever, right? You are including other people's code, and you are taking, or not, responsibility for the outcomes of that code. And the implications of npm install foo, right, are poorly understood, right? The average developer working at a bank, right, they're on a deadline, their boss is not holding hands, but he's very much hands-on, right? Needs to get this feature done by the weekend, right? And they're stuck. They can't get tab A into slot B. So what do? They Google how to tab A into slot B. A Stack Overflow article comes up. And it says at the top, how to get tab A into slot B. There's an explanation. At the bottom of this, npm install foo. The top-rated comment that has more upvotes than the entire article itself says, do not install foo. It is bad. It will wreak havoc on your systems. What's going to happen? Of course, right? He doesn't give a shit. Get tab A into slot B. Got to get my job done, right? Even if npm itself has a warning says, this is a bad idea. You're an idiot. Stop. It's like, got to fucking get it done, checking it in, right? So open source and corporations behave as if the source code from somewhere else came down on the back of a unicorn with rainbows coming out of its ass, right? And it is just not true. It is much more likely to think of it as, you're not getting free beer, you're getting free puppies, and they shit on the carpet, and they eat the couch, and they bark at the neighbors, and they do stupid things, right? Every dependency you have and have ever had is still a puppy, right? You could look at your code and say, we're pretty mature, and then you look at the dependencies like, right? Here's another great one for you. Anyone feel this one? This is my favorite image of all time. I had so much fun, took many iterations to get this one. But at the end of the day, right, you may be very proud of the code that your systems have built, right? But you're sitting here depending upon something that is a nights and weekend project for somebody who hasn't been active for 4 years and doesn't know anything about vulnerability reporting. So and by the way, actually a quick show. How many of you work for a corporation who is paying you to work on BSD? Okay, this is you, motherfuckers. I'm talking about you, okay? We're super clear. It was a trap. You fell right into it. But this is you, right? Your organizations are sitting there shipping products, investing your features and go-to-market things on top of those products, and that is awesome. It's great. You should, and that's why FreeBSD continues to exist, because there is a business model connecting to it, right? But you are neglecting this. Maybe you individually are not. You're here because you are in fact not neglecting that part. But it's transitive, and your companies need to have a better understanding of the risk they're carrying and the prioritization they're making about it, right? And I'm generalizing. Some of you better than others. I don't know any of you from Adam, but I've seen this a long time. Part of this is what we used to think of as critical and identifying which are the critical dependencies we should pay attention to has turned out to be completely useless, right? Rob Pike wrote a criticality score algorithm a while ago. It's junk. It looks at literally popularity and this and that. It doesn't matter. If it's in your dependency tree, it has total access. And every now and then someone's like, well, what about sandboxing? I'm like, great. Have you found a way to sandbox all of your dependencies and the whole process swing? Like that's great. Let me know when you've done that. It doesn't happen, all right? So since I was on the automatic images, AI images track like that, I took the infamous XKCD, because you can't have one of these presentations without having the XKCD image, right? And we asked it to generate. Can you even see it in this light? It's a bunch of like little boxes of routers and whatever, but we recreated the XKCD image in image form. It's almost invisible here. Bottom line, the size of your project is not the same thing as your risk, right? So you could have a one-line dependency, and by the way, the code could be immaculate, but how you bring it in, how you update it, and how it updates and how it handles vulnerabilities all create interesting risk, even if it's a one-liner called leftpad. So the lessons came out of this were really interesting, right? You have a graph underneath you of dependencies. And for every single one of those dependencies, you are doing one of these three things. Whether you think so or not, you are doing one of these three things. You're either actively involved in fixing it and helping maintain that code so it is secure. You're forking it. That fork may be a hard fork. You say, fuck it, we're going to get out of it and move on like that. It may be a soft fork where we'll live downstream of it. Or it may be an inadvertent fork where we haven't picked up an update for a long time and you occasionally put a patch in there by hand. I see one nodding vigorously there, right? You're feeling the pain right there, right? right? Or you are for fucking it. Get it off your damn system, right? So going back to Airflow, they looked at this list and they started doing these three things intentionally. There was one project like, why are we using this? Ditch it. Get it out of the system. Risk gone, right? There was another case where they, well, we don't need all the code. So they did a very hard fork where they forked it out, took the pieces they wanted, and said, we're now maintaining it. It's our code now. Let's be honest with it, right? And I'm very interested in that approach because far too many of us have these giant dependencies that we only use a teeny portion of, but we carry the whole risk of it, right? And in other cases, there was one that was fascinating. So if you're familiar with the CRA, this is legislation coming from the EU that is going to make everyone's lives more complicated when it comes to publishing software, responsible updates, supply chain security. And there was someone who was maintaining a project called Croniter, which is a Python library for managing cron files because no human should ever have to edit a cron file twice. And this individual was also making money on the side consulting for people who wanted to use their library and things like that. And they felt like they were going to be declared a manufacturer under this legislation and therefore liable and subject to fines for the vulnerabilities of the software. And so they announced their intent to shut the project down and to back away from the whole thing. The Airflow folks got involved, found a foundation home for it, helped the individual get over that moving their cheese stuff, and then moved the project into that foundation. And now that individual can keep maintaining it. They are no longer the benevolent dictator for life. They are part of a project. They're still a lead on it. And Airflow engineers have committed to supporting that project as well because they care about it. It's part of their dependencies. So there's a lot of things that can happen, and they're all very interesting there. So the takeaway is it's all your code. It's all your problem. And you should be looking at your stack and saying, where are my problems here? Not about the code that you own directly, but the code of everything. So of all these lessons, right, the most important thing comes down to actually it's about people. The Airflow thing was fascinating. We had some automated tooling following vulnerabilities on their dependencies. And it would show up, and the maintainer would do what every maintainer does when they see somebody else filing a vulnerability. They did nothing. And then someone from Airflow would show up on the issue and say, hey, I'm from Airflow. We use your project. This vulnerability is actually legit. We've had some tooling around it. We'd love it if you could pay a little bit of attention to it. We've got a PR rate here to go. What do you think? And people are like, oh my God, you know I exist? You're from Airflow? This is so cool. You use my stuff. I'll get it right tomorrow. Done. Right? And the goal here is actually to have an adopt a highway mindset where people from a project are actually thinking about who is the person responsible for that relationship, because it's about people. If you have a personal relationship with every one of your dependencies, and I mean the whole graph, transitively, right? And you may say, well, that's a lot of people. I'm like, well, it's a lot of risk. Or you may have a dependency project where you're like, oh, they've got their shit together. We can talk to them. They'll take care of their dependencies. So great, we can trust Bob on Project Food to take care of Barv and so forth like that. Great, okay. But you got to know those people. And you really want to know them before the shit hits the fan, because when the shit hits the fan, and we've seen this over and over again, whether it's XZ, where the shit was starting to hit the fan, somebody noticed but nobody else did, and interesting things happened, or Log4Shell, when the Log4j team was absolutely inundated with people who were very willing to help, very eager to help. It was overwhelming. They can't handle it, and they're not going to start a new relationship at a time of crisis. So really, the people that we worked with, these are just a fraction of the people, I think, Ed, you're up there somewhere, that we've worked with in Alpha Omega. It is all these people that have actually made everything we've done over the past few years possible, because I'm just me. I talk to them. This is my extended family now. It's more fun than anything else. So just briefly looking ahead at where we're going, but also kind of a little bit explaining of what we've been doing. So our funding gets spread across these 4 buckets. So we talked about staffing. Package repositories they're the software, they are the app stores of software development. Going back to that npm install foo example, right? When you go to the Play Store or the App Store and you're trying to find the budget car rental app and you inadvertently type nudge it and you get an app that looks like budget, even has a B in there, right? But it's actually the nudge it app, right? You would be extremely upset, right? And for all that Apple and Google don't do enough and could do more or whatever, right, they do some basic things to make sure that really awful things don't happen to you. And it's an implausibly hard problem, right? And it's even harder for an underfunded, non-monetized open source package repository, which is why we spend a fair amount of money helping them be more secure. And also the risk of somebody being able to attack one of these systems and to therefore insert and tamper with the packages you download. So even if npm install foo is a totally good idea, if the foo you get is really someone else's idea of foo, now you have really hard problems, right? And these are persistent, nasty problems that don't go away. We've talked about audits and remediation. It is a critical part of what we do. The amount of money spent is not as large as we thought it might be, and we want to spend more. I think we're cranking up this year. And going back to those rapid security views, we're working with OSTIF and the Eclipse Foundations and other organizations to do that. And we'd love to have similar patterns happening inside FreeBSD of like, what can we do organizationally across, because FreeBSD is a lot of modules, a lot of teams. What can we do to have a process? And we specifically don't call them audits, right? Because audits are very much, you have done something wrong, I'm here to find out what you did wrong and make you feel bad about it. The rapid security view is, hey, we're here, we just want to do a checkpoint. And we explicitly at the Eclipse Foundation chose to use this framework I love called I like, I wish, I wonder. And so the process is a little bit of automation, a little bit of questioning, a little survey you fill out for half an hour. We do some stuff, and then we come back with, I like, these are things you're doing great, right? I wish these things were better, or this was different like that, and I wonder why you did that, right? And by starting with that, they feel good about the conversation, they don't feel threatened, and they're eager to go off and do the things, and we don't overwhelm them with all the things that are wrong. We pick one or two and see if we can get them to fix that. And then we touch base with them again for another half hour, hour in a few months. And then finally, because none of us know what the fuck we're doing in this space, we are continuing to try new things, right? Because it's very easy for us to just latch in on those three things and just pour money there and miss out on a whole bunch of opportunities. And some of those things that we're trying, I think I've got a list. No, I don't. Okay. Oh, is it cropped off? No, it's in the next slide. Great, here we go. So looking ahead, we like to co-fund. So going back to any of the corporations that are working on FreeBSD and care about it, right? If there are things that you would like to see happening more and are willing to put money or resources, we are willing to match that, right? We want to see the extended community around a project get more skin in the security game. We want that to become a normal part of the business. We are very keen on foundational technologies like SALSA, which is essentially a framework for reasoning about security risk, and a technical lot of tools for preventing tampering at every stage of the software development process. If you go to slsa.dev, you can see the threat models. The primary effort was done around build integrity. If you remember the SolarWinds attack, that was a lot of build integrity attacks that essentially allowed the build system to keep doing and persistently keep inserting malware into the build artifacts with nobody knowing. Now there's a source integrity track, which is easily adopted and allows you to ensure that the source code has not been tampered with by the underlying forge or by users running that forge. We love the idea of transparent and reproducible builds because they basically mitigate most of the threats on the build side of integrity. Things that we're looking at, we're looking at the AI library thing. We have started this project, currently called the Open Source Core of Security Engineers, which just rolls off the tongue. But the idea is to take the security engineers that we work with, put them in a room together, and to talk about what we can do collectively to act as a sort of backstop or leader across these communities. We don't know what it's going to be like. We're taking it literally 1 month, one meeting at a time. And the next step is actually, last meeting we gathered together like just ideas or existence of playbooks around security that we wanted to put in one place. And then in a couple of weeks in Denver, we're going to get together and we're literally just going to put them into the repo and start organizing it. And it's just going to be a working session. I talk about business models, right? I'm actually putting my money where my mouth is here. I'm funding someone named Ava Black, who's quite well known in the open source circles. They are going to be working with major ecosystems to understand the sort of economics behind it and where we might be able to change their business models, right? Anchoring back on this, if you think about PyPI, right? PyPI's revenues are flat. Let's put them into the Python foundation bucket, they're still flat, right? There's donations and it's a pretty flat thing. If anything, they're dwindling, right? But the PyPI costs look like this. They scale with the number of people putting and downloading packages in there, right? And so the math is not good. And things are going to have to change. And it's going to be things that some people are going to find, and I'm unabashedly happy to charge in here and piss people off, right? We're going to have to start doing things that people are not comfortable with to find sustainable models, like charging for things, right? I know we're here in Canada, and I am a proud Canadian, but like, you know, hospitals get paid for the work that they do, right? Even when it's insurance or whatever, it's a non-profit entity, but it still gets paid for work. You can charge for value propositions. One of my favorite examples is an example of ICANN. Now you could look at ICANN and say, man, there's some fat cats at the top going on, and they are doing the trips to Fiji, right? And there are some fat cats making the next TLD and generating millions of dollars and like that. I don't give a shit, because they generate an unbelievable public good that has been reliable and effective for decades. Any idiot can get a domain name for $9 a year and have their own site and know that it has certain truths about it. Everybody can consume that domain knowing certain truths about it. That's amazing. That is a symbiotic relationship. I don't care if there's profit at the top, and the correct amount of fraud is never zero. So if we have all these risks around putting money in the picture for nonprofit and open source organizations, and people start chasing revenue and so forth, I'm like, these would be great problems to have. I would love to have to put more governance around that. And at the end of the day, the governance is what makes a difference. So I'm very interested in that. We'll learn a lot. We're also very interested in AI-powered audits. You know, unless you've been living under the biggest rock in the world, right? You can now fire up these tools and do amazing things. Hilariously, I tried to get most of the AIs to do the Airflow style audit of go look at my dependencies and find this sort of institutional risk, right? And it produced this long description of all the stuff it was going to do, had the plan. Now they'll tell you what they're going to do because I give a shit. Just do it, right? And then it produced the table. And the table had really good looking stuff. And there at the top of the table in almost fine print was, this is a made up table to show you what it would look like. I'm like, fuck you, why am I doing this, right? But the great thing about AI is if you don't like the current state of AI, it's like the weather in England, just wait an hour. It improves or changes constantly. And we actually are seeing opportunities, which brings me to this point here. Every project I've encountered doing automation in open source security ends up rebuilding the same stupid stuff over and over again. They go off and do something to go off and get stuff from GitHub. They pull data from NVD. They pull data from over there. They do all this stuff. And the amount of work they have to do, whether it's research or security, to just go off and get the basic metadata they need is stupid. And they all end up doing it over and over again. And I'm like, why don't we have something? And it turns out we do. And it's a subject of an entirely different talk. But ecosystems, ecosys.me.ms, an amazing gentleman named Andrew Nesbitt. He actually created libraries.io, sold it to Tightlift. They crushed it. He got funded to go do this, continues to deliver great things here, and we're going to double down on that and look at how, among other things, we can add, say, an MCP server to that. And by the way, MCP, the S stands for security. And see if we can get that AI-powered audit to have structurally meaningful data about its analysis so we can do things at scale. So with that, as promised, this is not the right QR code, but it'll get you to the same deck that I used at a different talk. That was the Go link. I didn't update the last slide. But it's exactly the same talk except for the header. And I'll share it with Deb, and you can pass on the decks any way you want, like that. I think I careened in on time, which is a miracle of scheduling and luck. I'd love to take questions, or you can throw things at me and I'll run away. It's fine. OK, I'm going to start throwing mics at people, or? Yeah. Or I can repeat questions.
No, we got mics.
Yeah.
I have. Can you hear me? Is this on?
You're getting thumbs up from the people up there. Yep.
You said something about doing stuff in Denver and putting together repeatable builds. I live in Denver, and if it's something I could turn up to and help, I would love to.
Excellent.
The question is, I guess, I'm drawing a blank. I guess, how do I do that?
OK.
I was going somewhere else, but I lost my train of
I will leave a stack of business cards at the front. You can contact me directly. For Denver, it is so in Denver, in the week of June 23rd, I think it is the Linux Foundation's Open Source Summit. It's their umbrella event for a lot of open source things. We are co-located with that, and on the Wednesday, thank you. We hosting in the morning a 3-hour meeting of the open source core security engineers, and then, and you're gonna be there?
No, I think that's probably Tuesday. I think
Okay. Oh, we're giving a talk on Wednesday, right? So Deb and I are giving a talk about Alice's good work. But on Tuesday is a meeting of the open source core security engineers. You'd be welcome to that. And in the afternoon is the round table. You're also welcome to that. That is not, he came first, so he gets dibs. But if other people are interested, please come and see me. We're not unlimited in our capacity, but happy to have more.
I can vouch for one or two.
Good. He's all right? Yeah. You passed. You're good.
Well, so I'm good most days, huh?
That's it? No more questions? Lulled you into sleep. Deb.
I do have a question. So you talked about matching. So if a company offered a match, so say we as the FreeBSD Foundation, so are you saying matching within Alpha Omega, or you would match their
So if
contribution?
FreeBSD went, got a bunch of companies drunk and said, if you cough up $10,000 each and 10 of them do that and there's $100,000, and you came to us and said, would you match that? We'd say, here's $100,000.
Okay.
It's not a blank check here, but one of our explicit goals for 2025 was to normalize other organizations funding security and benefiting from the outcome. And so matching is a great way to get people excited about that and see how, and we'll learn if it plays out. But yeah, we're keen to do that.
Okay, you all heard that.
And also, we would take in-kind matching too. So if an organization says, well, we don't have the cash, but Bob has been screwing around building some UI and we really want him to do something else, we'll look at that as well.
Yeah.
Okay? So I have a question for you. Since nobody else has questions, you thought you were going to get away with it, but I still have time. I'm going to use it. I'm hosting a workshop next week at the UN Open Source Summit. It's called a Maintainathon with the Sovereign Tech Fund folks. And we thought about how we wanted what we wanted the individuals to come away from the workshop from. And I came up with this silly little framework, which is today I learned, tomorrow I'm going to, and I wish something. So I'd like to hear from you. Today, did you learn something? Tomorrow, are you going to do something or different? Is something going to change? And what is it you wish? Like you heard all this and like, man, I wish there was a blank. Anyone? We need more coffee. Well, please think about, yes.
So, supposing I realize, all right, I'm dependent on XZ.
Yep.
I'm dependent on XZ. How can I somehow get somebody to deal with the issues that are going on there? I mean, I can realize I have a problem with some piece, but I don't know how to go about getting it dealt with.
I love this question. And so I think that the answer is, it depends upon your organization, right? So let's put you in the context of FreeBSD, which I think is the right context here. And what I would say is, you'd go to Ed and say, Ed, who among us has a relationship with XZ? And how should we, as an organization, establish one? And of course, Ed, being the master, he says, you should do that. That's great. Here's the email address. But I mean, at the end of the day, you don't want to be random about it. I totally agree. But as an organization, right, I would ask Ed, Ed, do you have a list of your external dependencies, right? And can I share that? So we are funding an Airflow-style audit for FreeBSD to go off and build the inventory of your dependencies, whether they're coming through packages or you're vendoring them to the source tree of source code that comes from somewhere else. And I would encourage you to include your own organizational boundaries of different projects because Conway's law. And just have that thing of like, okay, what are the relationships here? What are the projects we depend upon? How are we vendoring them in? Are we fixing? Are we forking? Are we forgetting about these things, right? And then to have an intentional outcome of that that says, whatever your name is, sir, is now the contact for XZ and is going to approach them and say, hey, I'm from FreeBSD, we use your stuff, Just wanted to say hi and let you know, and we're here to help. If you have some crisis, we'd be happy to help out from time to time, right? And in all likelihood, you'll never have to do anything at all except be there and give them some sense of not being alone. Yes?
So that suggests a question to me. Have you funded any efforts to, either for white papers or software, to help large organizations institutionalize this knowledge of the person-to-person connections? You know, Ed is great, but someday Ed might move on. He can't keep it all in his head. And now who do I go to find out who the contact at XZ is? You know, how do we pick up and hand off and still maintain that knowledge so that people can, you know, curate it and deal with that on a regular basis as people are coming and going from an organization, you know, that wants to do this stuff, wants to be good, but, you know, aren't very good at tracking these things. We have the same problem with vendors. They'll commit code to our tree, and then you know, the person that facilitated it moves on, and we don't know who to talk to anymore because the person that committed it moved on, and there's not additional relationships that we can pick up, you know, 5 years or 10 years later.
So this image, actually, I generated this image the first time when I wrote an article published on LinkedIn talking about the 3 Fs and talking about how organizations, private, open source, or otherwise, need to start doing that. We haven't funded a specific white paper separately. I think that article itself, and I can put up a Go link. It might be at the end of the deck as well, actually. Let me see, could I go here? Yeah, 3 Fs. So go.xwin.io/3Fs will link to that article as well. And so feel free to pass that on inside your organizations and have a conversation inside your organizations about, hey, what are we doing about these? I think the article is good enough. I don't need to pay for, I paid for myself to do it basically, so I think it was good enough to start. But I think we're also, rather than telling, we're showing, you know, this work here, other work we're doing, we've actually set an explicit goal of having more airflow style beach cleaning exercises across various ecosystems so that we can build up more data, more knowledge, and also just have more people, you know, walk the walk. So I think with that, I think my time is up. I will be here all day, and I think probably kibitzing and generally making trouble for most of the presenters all day. Thank you very much for having me this morning. I look forward to talking all day long.